Hello everybody, good afternoon, lovely to see you all again on perhaps not quite such a sunny day as we've been experiencing on this lockdown, but equally perhaps quite apt to have a day like today where it's a little bit more like our April weather, a little bit more sort of intermittent, little bit of sunshine, little bit of rain, and thoroughly unpredictable, I guess. But certainly it sets the scene rather nicely for today's concert, a spring-themed concert. And just really exploring different composers at this point, actually, rather than sticking with one composer like we've been doing in the last 3 weeks. But really giving you a sort of, again, a sense of that smell of nationalism in these different countries and in different areas that we're going to explore. So before we start, I just wanted to say thank you for all the lovely emails and messages and comments and everything that everyone's been sending in. It's been a real pleasure to receive those, and we've now got followers in America, in India, in Australia, in Europe. So quite extraordinary how far the reach of these concerts has got in such a short amount of time. This being concert 4, so basically week 4 of the English lockdown. So today I'd like to tell you a little bit about sort of spring and what it means to different composers. It's interesting how, as musicians, I guess we're all sort of quite susceptible to sort of changes in mood and emotion, and the seasons plays a huge part in that. And as far as inspiration goes for composition, each of the different seasons really sort of has its own taste and its own sort of flair and quality. So, you know, if we think all the way back in 1716, when we've got Vivaldi, who takes his 4 seasons and he writes a little bit about the spring, summer, autumn and winter, but this one we certainly know very well. And if you didn't, then obviously Mr. Nigel Kennedy has done some various fantastic versions of the seasons, along with many other wonderful violin players. But he really sort of started this idea of mimicking birds and getting that bird song. And when the birds are singing a lot at this time of the year, aren't they? And really sort of singing their hearts out and telling you all about how we've all survived the winter. It's a very positive story, isn't it? So if you hear these birds, so Vivaldi really sort of looked into that. He'd obviously gone for lots of country walks and lots of walks, as we've all been doing in this lockdown, really sort of exploring different sounds and rhythms. So he set the scene for these spring ideas and spring themes. And then various composers have written along the way. I'd like to sort of show, I guess, in one extreme to the sort of the warmth and the tonality of Vivaldi, and perhaps go into the sort of depths of rhythmic clarity and sort of drive that you get in Stravinsky and his Rite of Spring. So at the beginning, the adoration of the earth. Starts his ballet, just totally different from tonality that we're used to, and then the sort of anger and the augurs of spring that you hear later on. So then that's 1913, so the you know, just on the cusp of the First World War, and lots of things to come historically. But you can start to see where I'm going with this, the idea of different types of spring sounds and what different spring ideas means to different composers. So I'm not going to play these 2 for you today. I'm going to play 4 totally different composers from what you've just heard, but just getting you in the mood for this idea of spring. So the first composer we're going to hear a little bit about is Edvard Grieg, the Norwegian composer. And he grew up in Bergen in the mountains, and if you've done a Norwegian fjord cruise, which I found myself doing many at one point in my career, you find yourself in this fantastic port surrounded by mountains, and the fish market and fresh fish and salmon and all sorts of wonderful things and different sort of cultures again. And right up in the top of the mountains is Griegs composing his house and his hut, which overlooks a lake, and gave him a great source of inspiration. He was sort of plagued with illnesses and pneumonia and all sorts of nasty sort of lung disease, I think from having a collapsed left lung. So he ended up being able to write a lot of compositions as a result. And I guess in this lockdown that we find ourselves in, it's going to be so interesting to see what the composers are going to have to say about all of this. But he wrote 10 books of lyric pieces and incorporating sort of folk songs and Norwegian dances and things like that. And a lot of the pieces are in ternary form. That's ABA. So starting one theme, then you have a middle theme, and then it comes back to the original theme. And you really hear this in his piece To the Spring, written in F sharp major, all those lovely black notes that we've been talking about. And you can hear, it's almost like sort of the first shoots of spring poking through the snow. And then as it progresses, it goes into a sort of full bloom. So it starts with a very gentle opening. Just very, very gentle. And then as it comes back, sort of like those early crocuses and those early snowdrops, they're just starting to sort of bloom as he goes on. So the next piece, so that was written, let's think, in 1883, and the next piece I'm going to play after that is going straight over to an American composer born in Illinois and studied at Chicago Musical College, and Zez Comfrey, if that's a jazz name if ever there was one, Edward Zelenar, who became nicknamed Zez, and he was in World War One, and he was in the US Navy at this point. But after the war, he came out and did a lot of compositions with piano rolls, and you'll hear how he's just got that sort of Tin Pan Alley sound and that Charleston and sort of rumba rhythms going, real sort of ragtime, real change. And this is called Spring Song because, a little bit like we were doing last week, starting in one piece and ending in something else, he starts with Mendelssohn, and then he has his complete own sort of ragtime take on it. So there's a little bit of fun after Griegs To the Spring. The third piece I want to play to you, interestingly, also written in 1925, the same year that Zez Comfrey was writing his Spring Song, a sort of pastiche. He wrote a sort of set of classical works and a pastiche in that year. But in 1925, the English composer John Ireland had also got a lot to say about the sort of spring idea, and he wrote a beautiful piece called April. Now, John Ireland, he went to the Royal College of Music and studied composition under Stanford, and was really sort of influenced by that sort of the sound of the sort of the English greats that came up through the Royal College at that point, and he really developed that own English impressionism. And some of his compositions, his piano concerto, really evoke those sort of different sounds and bird calls and flurries and all of the things that we get in English countryside in April. He lost both his parents when he was quite young, at 15 and 16, and they say that he was a very self-critical, quite introvert man, and there was a sort of deep sadness about him. And And I think for me, the April piece has really got that reflective quality. It's not overtly blooming like the Grieg is, perhaps, but just really sort of drawing us into his world, which is, you know, there's always light and shade in music, and there's always that sort of darkness, and then, you know, something comes out of it which gives us our sort of thread of positivity and our thread of hope. So the last piece, we're going back to Norway again, and we're going to hear a piece by Christian Sinding, which was written in 1896, a little bit later than the Grieg piece. And Sinding was sort of dubbed to be Grieg's sort of predecessor after setting up this Norwegian sound. And he wrote lots of compositions and songs, and he went over to America for a couple of years and came back. And his Rustle of Spring was one of his most famous compositions, and it's got the sort of real energy of spring and the sort of rustling of leaves and blowing the cobwebs away. That's sort of how it sort of feels to play, and perhaps is how it feels to listen to. So you sort of hear that at the beginning. So you hear that sort of energy and bubble, bubble, bubble as it's sort of toiling through the spring, sort of coming out of winter, and all the streams are melting and all the fjords are starting to fill after the winter. So a real mixture today. Hopefully to sort of keep us all nice and positive, and staying strong and staying healthy, and enjoying our gardens and our outdoor spaces once a day, and all of those lovely things. But just a sort of glimpse into different composers' takes on spring. So I hope you enjoy these 4 pieces. So the Grieg to the Spring, Zez Comfrey's Spring Song. Then we have April by John Island, and finishing up with The Rustle of Spring by Sinding. thank you so much for watching again, everybody. Next week we're sort of back into the Simmons term again, having sort of played through the Easter holidays, and I'm going to do a concert with some Brahms and Liszt, which I'm sure those of you that know anything about Cockney rhyming slang has got a sort of slight sort of zing to it, and I shall leave that there for all the little ones watching. But yeah, so just a little bit of a different take on some Brahms pieces and Liszt as well. So thank you very much again for watching. I did an interview for BBC Radio Solent yesterday, so I'm not quite sure when that's going to be broadcast, but certainly you know, it's exciting stuff that they're interested to hear about this. So yes, thank you very much for all your support and lovely messages, and see you next week. Bye.